Go.
Time, a force as inescapable as gravity, yet as mysterious as the stars. It flows, we think, in one direction, measured in seconds, minutes, and hours. What if time isn't so straightforward? What if it bends, warps, or halts entirely, slipping through our fingers like grains of sand? Across cultures and ages, humanity has been haunted by stories where time behaves in ways that defy explanation. These accounts, whispered through fairy tales, alien abduction reports, and ancient writings, carry an eerie consistency that beckons us to look closer. Fairy tales are often seen as simple stories for children, yet many contain profound mysteries. Time in these tales rarely behaves as we know it. Sleeping Beauty, cursed by a malicious fairy, slumbers for a century while the world moves on. Rip Van Winkle awakens from mystical sleep to find his village unrecognizable. Even the changeling stories of Celtic lore, where stolen children return to their families years later without aging, speak to something deeply settling. Oh, shoot. Can I start at fairy tales?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Fairy tales are often seen as simple stories for children, yet many contain profound mysteries. Time in these tales rarely behaves as we know it. Sleeping Beauty, cursed by a malicious fairy, slumbers for a century while the world moves on. Rip Van Winkle awakens from a mystical sleep to find his village unrecognizable. Even the changeling stories of Celtic lore, where the stolen children return to their families years later without aging, speak to something deeply unsettling about time's fluidity in folklore. Modern alien abduction accounts echo these themes with missing time as a common thread. Abductees report hours vanishing in an instant, entire nights slipping away like moments. These tales don't just rely on memory. Clocks and devices have allegedly malfunctioned in tandem with these temporal anomalies, as though the very fabric of time and space were disrupted. These modern reports bear an uncanny resemblance to the ancient legends of people spirited away to other realms, only to return to find lifetimes had passed. Then there are those ancient texts. The Bible itself records moments where time stands still or even reverses. In one of the most extraordinary passages, the sun halts in the sky at Joshua's command, allowing the Israelites to finish a battle. In another, King Hezekiah receives a sign from God as the shadow on the sundial moves backwards across the globe. Hindu epics like the Mahabharata recount stories where a single visit to the divine results in eons passing on earth. Sumerian myths describe gods who exist outside of mortal time altogether. But what could explain these strange accounts? Science offers tantalizing possibilities. Einstein's theory of relativity shows us that a time is not a constant. It can stretch or compress near massive objects or at high speeds. Could ancient storytellers have intuitively grasped truths about time that modern physics only now begins to explore? Quantum theories even suggest that the existence of parallel timelines where different versions of reality might coexist. If these timelines occasionally intersect, could that explain the missing hours, the unaged children, or the centuries-long sleep in folklore? Time's strangeness isn't confined to myths or theories. Our own perception of time is fluid. In moments of danger, time slows to a crawl. In dreams, we live out entire lifetimes in a matter of minutes. Mystics and philosophers alike have long pondered whether time itself is real or merely a construct of the human mind. And if it's a construct, what happens when we step outside of it? From the tales of ancient scribes to the confessions of modern abductees, these stories challenge our understanding of reality. They suggest that time is not a straight line, but a complex web, one that we might be only just beginning to understand. Today, in the Hidden Citadel, we unravel these mysteries, asking the question, what if the anomalies in these tales aren't just metaphors, but glimpses into the deeper hidden truths of our universe? Kingdoms rise and empires crumble, and the knowledge and wisdom from past ages are lost to the foggy ruins of time. But for genuine seekers of truth, one place stands alone on a hill. Shining brightly in the darkness, you, dear listener, have reached the Hidden Citadel.
Hey, welcome to the Hidden Citadel.
Awesome.
That was
That's
a
right.
good intro, Greg. It's
Thank
nice
you.
to share the burden.
I like it. I think that's a lot. It's fun.
I
It's
thought
fun
it came
taking
out
your
good.
words. Yeah, I like your words, and it's just kind of like trying to see how you're phrasing things. Like what was your cadence? And it's kind of fun doing that.
I think it's fun just writing this stuff. It's neat to come up with crazy things. You know, today, if you haven't guessed it, folks, we are talking about time anomalies. And it's something that we are both incredibly curious about because it seems like anytime you dig into the strange and the weird, you don't have to dig very far before you find something that involves anomalies related to time. One of the coolest ones that I recently uncovered that's kind of a modern time anomaly is a really interesting factoid. Did you know that Chuck Norris doesn't age? Time simply doesn't want to mess with him.
No, that's yeah.
So,
It's psychologically, like, okay, not to go in a different direction already, but it's one of those things that whether in religion or in just basic aging or anything like that, there is a fantasy about combating time, slowing time, fighting time, not letting time affect in some way. Even the finite matter that the finite life or time that we have or our lives really begs the fantasy of, could this be longer? Could there be another life? In Christianity, you have heaven, you have eternal life, which obviously takes that finite amount of time, makes it purposeful, and then equips it for an eternity. So, but if you look at what we're talking about um, with like the fairy tales and stuff, if you take where we're going to go with them, which is like, what if they have some truth to them? Then the fairy tale, just the concocting of it by the human psyche, could very well be something that suspends time for a moment in order to provide you some relief from what time does to you over in despair, in depression, or in just the depressive realism that you only have a certain amount in the thread that you've been given.
yeah.
I think of those. Is that who are the three? Are they three fates?
The three fates with the thread.
Yeah, yeah.
Before they
Atropos
cut
and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget. Atropos, Madge, and Daphne. No, I don't know.
Yeah. and Roscoe.
And Roscoe, yeah. That was their dog. The other part of that, too, that's on, before we get into the really weird stuff, is there's a connection between losing your time when you're engaged in like an artistic activity.
Yes.
So like when you're painting or you're writing a song or you're playing music, you're at a gig, and all of a sudden 4 hours go by, and you're like, wait a minute, how did 4 hours just go by? Or little kids, they're like, wait, surely it's not time to go. Greg
Yeah.
Brown, the folk singer's got this thing. He's like, we shouldn't have to come in. It's not dark yet. It's adult dark. You know, they've been inside yak, yak, yak talking about somebody's gallbladder. They don't know if it's dark out or not, you know, and he's talking about kids playing outside, and it's like you don't realize how the time just seems to speed up, or the opposite is slow down. Like if you're taking a test and you're like, oh, I just, you know, you feel like the day's never going to end, you know, and it just crawls on, or if you're sick or something. Is time is a very there's until we had clocks too, this was the kind of thing that nobody had a really good way of measuring it, you know. And even now, I wonder if we have a good way of measuring it sometimes, because it seems like there's still something mysterious about it that clocks don't even, you know. Like, if you could put a clock up at a satellite, it has to be calibrated to where it will match the clock down on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but you would think, well, if I have an atomic clock, it should just work. It doesn't matter where it's at. It should just keep time the same way, but they don't. There's something about it that slips somehow.
Yeah. It's, you know, we listed in the intro the King Hezekiah and the Joshua, but you know, there's those other mysteries of like a day for God is like 1,000 years.
True.
And then, but are even more interesting to me is like in a blink, in a twinkling of the eye.
Yeah.
That's I think the literal part of that is so fast. It's supposed to be a blink. The thing, a blink technically doesn't have a speed to it.
Right.
And a twinkling doesn't really have a twinkling.
You can't measure that. Yeah, you can't measure that at all. I mean,
the twinkling of a star, you can watch that for
hours. Yeah, all night long.
And there can be a slowness of a blink that can take, you know, a while. It's like really interesting because I think we think of it as speed.
Yeah.
We think of it as instantaneous. I think one of them, there might be even a passage that says in an instant. But I mean,
yeah. One of the things what
does an instant mean?
Who knows? One of the things that I teach my students in my martial arts class is a technique called Heaven 6. It's a 6-count sword fighting attack where it's 3 attacks on one side and then 3 attacks on the other side. And if you're on the receiving end of it and you don't know about it, it is a devastating combination of attacks to where it's just like a blur of bum, you know, you're hit 6 times. Another one in Wing Chun is called chain punching, where they have like 12 punches right in a row that just explode out of nowhere. Well, here's the thing. If you have practiced and you get to the point where you've worked on that over and over and over and over again, then even if somebody comes at you really fast, you know the combination to do it. When I was first learning guitar, I would listen to Eric Clapton and hear him play a solo and think, I can't even fathom how fast. I can't think of what he's playing. It's like the notes just blur by. But now it's like I've been playing his music for so many years that it's like I don't have a problem processing that anymore.
Yeah.
And yet,
it's interesting.
All of that is related to time.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. In football at the professional level, when the athletes come out of college and they're playing, and, you know, obviously the professional level it moves at a different pace. But they will say that after a while, the game slows down for them. And it's interesting. And you begin to see that. You begin to see that they know where things are going. They can see them before they happen, essentially. And so it's like, you know, in those depictions of Flash with the DC universe, they'll show, you know, he's moving, everything else is slow.
Exactly.
It's kind of like what happens at the NFL level with a lot of these guys when they say they get so skillful that the game slows down. And I would imagine that's what happened with the Clapton thing as well.
Yeah, well, and it happens like somebody like Bruce Lee. where I had two teachers. One of the teachers was basically like the grandson, of, if you considered it that way, of Bruce Lee, where the other one was like a son. One of them took lessons directly from Bruce Lee, and one of them took lessons from a teacher that Bruce Lee taught. And they said that guy was so fast. And it's like his concept of speed and my concept of speed are so completely different, that he moved at such a higher level, and he started out as a dancer. He wasn't even a martial artist. He was a cha-cha teacher, I think was what. And then he went to teach Ip Man's wife how to dance, and he was like, well, you could probably be a pretty good martial artist, and he started teaching him martial arts. And it's the concept of how time works just in an everyday basic way is weird. Then when you get into, we can segue into some of these fairy tales now, and it's like, it's almost like, one of the things that occurred to me is whenever magic exists in a story or in a system or in even people that believe in magic in real life, there's always when the magic is happening, it's always related to some sort of strange time anomaly.
Yeah.
That's how you know that the magic's happening, is time gets weird in some way. Cinderella, she had a certain amount of hours that she was allowed, that the magic was allowed to work, and then it would dissipate and disappear. But what was strange about that is everything else vanished except for the shoes. She lost a shoe, and in a lot of the other stories, she had the other shoe, where everything else vanished. And then when the prince found her, she was able to produce the other shoe and marry him. Whether it was the glass slipper, the silver slipper, or the gold slipper, depending on the story. But the point is, time got bizarre, and it had a limit to the magic spell. When Sleeping Beauty fell asleep, 100 years goes by, and the curse was, you're going to sleep for 100 years, and then it'll be, well, the original curse was that she would die, but then the other fairy godmother changed it to, no, you only sleep for 100 years. And and in some stories, the whole castle went to sleep for 100 years with her, and in other ones, they had to leave because they couldn't stand being there, and so the castle kind of was abandoned for 100 years. Some of the stories are really strange too when you look at the actual original versions of the stories. They're like, dude, these are bizarre tales. Rip Van Winkle, he falls asleep for 20 years in the Catskill Mountains. I mean, talk about a nap.
Talk about, being vulnerable to like big cats and wolves.
Yeah, who knows what could have eaten him. I've hiked through the Catskills, and it's like, there's some crazy stuff out there.
People, nonetheless.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. You also brought up Peter Pan. And there's that I think that's just a great example that it's a place where time is not welcome.
No.
Time is not allowed.
Right.
And they're suspended at a certain, in a certain maturity level, essentially, and it becomes a utopia of sorts.
Yep.
That doesn't, because time's restricted or not imposed, that it's allowed to, there's something about it that works.
Well, and it's the only kind of utopia story that actually we could all kind of say, yeah, I could kind of see that actually would work as a utopia. When you're suspended as children, but even then they wanted a mother, and that's why they needed Wendy, but it's like...
That's like Thomas Hobbes. It's like the Leviathan, where it needs a monarch.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's begging for a monarch. Yeah.
Well, and
that's where
that goes back to Gilgamesh too, and the slaying of Humbaba,
mm-hmm.
and he wanted to be the king. And well, I think we talked about this before, where Humbaba is the Sumerian way of saying Yahweh, and so they
Yeah.
name the Leviathan Yahweh. And then that goes along with the Leviathan being the Ouroboros, which ultimately is the Milky Way, which what was the
Mm-hmm.
Milky Way but a big clock? I
Yeah.
remember one time we went camping in a dark park up in Virginia where there are no lights for miles and miles and miles around, and so all these astronomers come to put their telescopes out and look at the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Never in my life had I been in a place where I could just lay back in a field and with my naked eye see the Milky Way and watch it just
Wow.
kind of travel across the night sky. And I was like, this must have been what it was like back in the day. And you would tell stories about, you know, everything that was there because it's so easy to see it all.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's like early TV because
Mm-hmm.
it's shining lights. They're doing stuff that they're kind of individually animated in a way, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of begging for a story to be associated with what's
That's
happening with
true.
you. What you know?
Well, and that's what we had talked about the stories about Jason and the Argonauts,
Mm-hmm.
and how it seemed like a lot of the Greek tales really only seem like they're some kind of connection to learning the star system. But
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some research this week, and I'm kind of blown away about the Greek um, myths.
Mm-hmm.
And this may shock you too, or maybe it won't, but Greek culture only goes back to about 700 BC. And before
Really?
that, they were completely illiterate. So, like, the Greek language itself was invented after the Phoenicians around 700 BC. So, a lot of the Greek stories take place within 700 and and 1,000 years before the Greek culture. Well, guess who was collecting stories at that time and writing them down? Moses. So it's
Yeah.
like Moses writing the law predates the entire culture of Greece, by a good chunk of time. And then you've got the Egyptians when Solon went to Egypt, and they said, you guys only remember one catastrophe, one flood, but we've had
Mm-hmm.
many." And then he tells them the story of Atlantis and how, Atlantis had hubris and pride, and then the gods wiped them out and all that kind of stuff. Well,
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff is after somebody like Joshua or Gideon or Samson lived. All
Yeah.
of their stories were written down way after that time period. And so it's like the mythologizing of any of those things that are in the myths could be a mythologizing of anything that was actual truth that took place sometime after Noah's flood with Nimrod or with, one of the early patriarchs or other
Yeah.
people that lived in that area. It's like that pretty much shocked me when I found that out, because in my mind, I always just was thinking, okay, Moses, the ancient Greeks, the
Mm-hmm.
ancient Egyptians, the Sumerians, they're all like around the same time. And it's like, no, really, the Greeks were later, on the scene, and I don't know. I don't know if that shocks you as much as it shocked me, but that was a kind of a
Oh, well,
big
yeah. I
deal.
mean, going from well, consider it because it always feels like the concept of the alphabet, the concept of what the Greeks have given us. It feels like they are a part of their own antiquity. They're
Mm-hmm.
their own, and they have something almost it's immeasurable how far back they go.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. The one thing we've talked about this before, but with some of the early uh, biblical figures, they're living to like, in the hundreds, and even the 900 or 700 and that sort of thing. And you wonder, just like, it goes back to the question: is time measured differently for them? Does time move differently for them? Are their years the same amount of years?
You never know. What if the Earth slowed down or sped up?
Or what if their aging didn't have the same effects that our aging does? And so
maybe
they're what the whether it's the friction or whatever it is that's being imposed on our bodies to cause aging and slowing down moves at a minuscule rate compared to what it does now. And the entropy doesn't impact us as it did back then. But it's interesting because I was reading this morning about the Transfiguration. How did they recognize?
I've thought that so many times.
Well, that's Moses.
Yeah,
and that's Elijah. So it's not like there's pictures of them in their wallets.
Right.
Wow.
My thinking is this.
There's the Rambam.
I think with Moses, they recognized maybe he was carrying the tablets.
Yeah.
And this is where I think the Transfiguration was and I wish with Elijah we had this, but we do have it with Moses. There was a time when Moses was on the mountain with God.
Yes.
And he was talking to God as though he were a friend. What if that was a time tunnel and he was talking to Jesus, and when Jesus is talking to Moses and Elijah, they're like, wait a minute. He's having the conversation that's recorded in the book, and we're hearing everything that Moses is saying that's recorded in the books. Oh. And so they were talking to Jesus. And it's like, that's where it connected in their head for the first time. This is God. This is Jehovah. And something that Jesus was probably saying to Elijah was like, I put aside 3,000 prophets who haven't bent the knee to Baal. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. That's what Jehovah said to Elijah, And I'm thinking that it was probably a time portal is what happened.
It makes a lot of sense.
I mean, doesn't that make that's the only conclusion that I could ever come to, that they would recognize who those guys were, because they could have been anybody.
Well, also in Mark 9, it talks about some of you will not perish before seeing the kingdom of God come. Yep. And if you're talking about maybe kind of the nonlinear, like the web you're talking about in the intro, in nonlinear, like you said, if they're watching the conversation between God or Jesus and Moses and knowing what it is, they're watching the conversation. They're watching, but almost in real time, because it's happening from a different part of time in front of their eyes.
Yeah.
And it's just, if you're watching, then also with Moses, I mean, you're getting like then it's truly more of a web. It's more, or just a multi-dimensional, whether it's, dimension vertically or horizontally. I'm not really sure, or both. Not really sure.
Or some sort of a strange spiral. Yeah. Like we talk about in TOB, so everybody can go buy TOB off of Amazon and you'll know what we're talking about.
That's a great description. I love that description of the swirl, the helix.
Helix of time.
But that would make a lot more sense when Jesus said, some of you will not perish before seeing it. Well, how would that happen? Well, they would see it if they were able to see dimensionally the end.
Yes.
They were able to have access to be able, because he said you'll see it. Mm-hmm. So you're able to see something that's taking place.
Well, and also I wonder about this. When Jesus said that, and he said, some of you will not die, but will see the end, right? And Peter, it's got this illusion, like Peter is saying, wait a minute, are you saying that John will never die? And then it even says in there, and so there became the saying that John would never die, but that's not what Jesus said. Well, so we know that passage had to do with John. Mm-hmm. And then later, what did John see? He was the one that wrote the Revelation that saw the end way before it happened. and he wrote down how everything was going to go down. Maybe what Jesus was saying there is not that you're going to live in the book he does in TOB, but in reality, he wasn't saying you're going to live all the way for thousands of years until I return. He was saying you're going to see how it all ends at some point.
Is there a way to put the link to TOB?
It is. It's on every single episode. There's a link to TOB.
Awesome.
Down below. Yeah. So you guys can click on it down below and link to it. Also, there's a link to this really good book that came out a while back called The Encyclopedia of Weird Crap. And you can enjoy that book and buy it too, because we talk about all sorts of stuff. There's also the WordPress is where we keep all of our articles, like this one. And this one isn't a full-fledged article yet. We're still editing it and working on it. But basically, hiddencitadel4.wordpress.com is where we keep all of our articles. And I'm telling you what, I was thinking about it today. I'm really becoming very proud of that blog, because in just a few short months, we have gotten so many good articles that just compile all the weird stuff that we're talking about into one place. And I think that somebody that's into this stuff, we just scratch the surface sometimes. Yep. And we go way deep on those articles into some really interesting background stuff that it'll send you off onto other tangents that you can check out. And so finally, while we're at it, might as well plug the t-shirts. You can get those at redbubble.com if you like what we're doing. Head on over there and get one. And I think you'll really enjoy it. But anyway, in the article that I'm working on, or that we're working on, one of the things that I got listed at the very end is this long 100 different, what did we call it? It was 100 devices, objects, and environments associated with time anomalies.
That is awesome.
And I think I could have gone more than 100.
I don't think I've seen anybody talk about such things before.
I haven't either. And I don't know. I was just sitting there thinking about this, and I was like, I need to compile and categorize every single thing that I can find that has to do with a time anomaly, and how it cross-references, whether it's a biblical thing, whether it's ancient text, whether it's modern UFO things, or whether it's a fairy tale or a ballad, all these different things, the sources that we're digging from, there always has a time thing involved. And so it's like there has to be a way to list this. And so that's what I started doing. And the first one that I got is Enchanted Forests. And how many stories have some weird environment, an enchanted forest, where somebody stumbles into it, or they walk into a fairy ring, or they walk into, did you ever read Lawhead's books? Stephen Lawhead?
Oh, a little bit.
He's got a book called the Albion Cycle. Not the King Arthur books, which are awesome, but this is the Song of Albion. And basically the guy's taking a tour around what do you call those? I forget what they're called, the mounds. And he's walking the wrong way around the mound, and all of a sudden he's not in England anymore. He's in Albion, and he's got a fight, and it's the ancient Celtic, he becomes one of the ancient Celtic gods or something.
Well, that's like what Outlander is all about.
Oh, is it?
The Sassenach. And Susanok means the outlander, the person who's out of time.
That's interesting.
And it's like, and they go to, and I think it's at Stonehenge, and they step through.
Oh,
and they
that's
end up
interesting.
But knowingly back in time. They refer to the outsider, the alien, the person out of time, as a Susanok.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that show yet. There's so many shows right now to watch that it's hard to find time to watch half of them,
Yeah.
And some of them, it's like I'm really looking forward to this. Like I really wanted to watch The Wheel of Time because I like the Robert Jordan books.
I'm doing the same thing. I'm just that Stranger Things, which I think are both time based.
Yeah, that too. And I haven't got to see the latest season of Stranger Things either, and I want to watch that. But the Robert Jordan one, I watched about an episode or two, and I was like, I can't get past the bad acting. It was like I could, and I need good acting. Even like the new Lord of the Rings series that tells Galadriel, and I watched an episode of that, and I was like, I don't like these actors. I just couldn't get into it.
I think what's his name? I think Elrond. He looks like a crescent moon.
Yeah,
his chin comes way out.
Yeah, right.
But I think the guy that plays Sauron is just really good. And
that may be
Galadriel.
Yeah,
Galadriel. Yeah.
I don't know.
But anyway, let's go back.
Yeah. So anyway, we got Enchanted Forest.
Yes, and so it's interesting because one of the things Dr. Heiser talks about when he talks about the sea, it's a place of mystery. It's a place that's uncharted. Yeah. It's a place of great depth. It's a place of the unknown.
Did I conclude that? I need to put that in my list.
And so he talks about that when the scripture talks about the sea or the sea monsters, and it's the place of the unknown that that essentially has endless possibility of depth and of expanse, and since you can't chart it, since you can't time it, since you can't measure it, it becomes something that is something to fear in a sense. Mm-hmm. And so you almost did the same thing with the Enchanted Forests. You're going to a place that now light is altered, and light often gives us time. You go in there, and without the sun, without something showing you where things are, now time, it's almost like time can be suspended. Time can be whatever you want it to be.
Well, okay. I don't think you've seen it yet. Have you seen the Skinwalker Ranch show? No. I'm telling you, you gotta watch it. You'll love it. It'll blow you away because I really don't get the feeling that they're doing a lot of editing in this, and some of the things that they show just blow your mind, like these orbs that just pop up out of the mesa and then they fly right in and disappear, and then they'll be here, and then all of a sudden it's over here, and it's bouncing around so fast, and they're like, an aircraft can't do that kind of a thing. Or they'll be flying their helicopter and they'll get a beep that says 50 feet below you is another aircraft, and they're like, there's nothing below us 50 feet, or they'll be 50 feet above all of a sudden, and it's another aircraft, and they're like, what on earth is going on? There's so many weird things like that, and it's like Skinwalker Ranch is one of those, haunted it's not a forest, it's a mesa, but it's a haunted environment like that, or an enchanted environment where weird things happen, and I feel like there's a lot of those places that even now, like, they build tourist attractions on them sometimes. Like out in South Dakota, I went to this place called Cosmos, where things were strange. Like, you could put a ball on the ground and it would roll uphill, because it was like an optical illusion or something. Apparently there's a place like this in North Carolina too, somewhere, where they have things like that. And the Indians were like, we're not having anything to do with those places. There was a place. This is kind of unrelated, but just in terms of mysticism, it is related. But there's a place in somewhere like near Chicago that there was a school bus that broke down on railroad tracks, and a train hit it and killed Oh,
Everybody
wow.
killed all the children on it. So then, if you go up to that railroad track and stop your car
I
and
heard of this.
put it in neutral, it will be it gets
Pushed back.
pushed. I think it's pushed forward
Oh, into the train.
over the track, so it completes the act that never took place.
Oh, I see.
And
That's
supposedly
interesting.
they put powder on the back of the cars.
And you can
If you
see
put
the.
powder, the kids' handprints.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It says in the Bible, "It is appointed man once to die, and after that the judgment." But that's a
Yeah.
comma. I mean, basically, and it's like
Yeah.
we don't really know how quick you get to be judged, because in Revelation it says, "And then the sea was ordered to give up its dead."
Mm-hmm.
And all these different places were ordered to, hell was ordered to give up its dead. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, wait a minute. If that means that there are dead souls contained in different areas, that at the end they're ordered to give it up, then that means that there might be some freedom for, ghosts to exist,
Yeah.
and things like that to happen, that don't necessarily have to be a demon.
Right. And what are they occupying? Like, what kind of space and time are they occupying? Because they're not in the finite world. They have
Nope.
to be. So they don't age, right?
No.
I don't think
Yeah,
they
no,
do.
I
I
wouldn't
mean,
think
so
so.
so what are they occupying? Like, what are the physics of this? And
Yeah,
to your point that you've made before in the intro, that maybe it's a construct. Maybe it is more of a construct. And
maybe.
there, yeah, I think Elon Musk's he said recently, even birthdays are something of a construct that takes away our ability to have, um it enforces age.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're almost putting, like, if it was kind of like almost a mind over matter kind of thing, that you are imposing your breakdown, you're imposing your entropy by
Yeah.
way of birthdays. If you didn't have birthdays,
Then you wouldn't
that you
notice.
would
Yeah.
yeah, you would notice. Yeah, you wouldn't notice the aging.
I think about that movie. I think was it Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey?
Interstellar. Yeah.
That
All right.
that movie is kind of what I imagine it must be like being a ghost. And it
Mm.
reminds me too of, I think it's, I can't remember the name of the book. It was one of Charles Williams's books.
Mm-hmm.
The Greater Trumps, maybe. And I don't think
Mm.
it's talking about Donald. And he's talking about how this guy goes to hang himself, and then all of a sudden he realizes that something went wrong, and he wasn't able to hang himself. And then it's like later on he finds out, oh, he did hang himself, he's dead. And he's been wandering
Oh,
around the whole time, not realizing that he was dead.
that
And
Sixth Sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, it really was a lot like Sixth Sense in that way. And then the other thing too is, like, a Nephilim is half human.
Yeah.
And Nephilim turn into ghosts, or Rephaim, according to
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah, once they die. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like you've got, there is precedent in the Bible for ghosts and entities like that to exist. I'm
Yep.
wondering, are some of the spirit beings, the fairies, the Shay, the djinn, could they
Mm-hmm.
be ghosts? Or are they their own entity, like an elemental spirit, like we talked about before? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, and can they interact with each other? Like, could a ghost, if a djinn is an elemental spirit and it's not a ghost, well, what's weird about it is djinn activity a lot of times is like poltergeist activity.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if they're not the same thing, would they be able to interact with each other? Fairy activity is a lot like poltergeist activity too. So it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe the ghosts are the fairies and the djinn of the ancient lore. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I keep going back to, these where we're like the places we see the ghosts, and that why, again, related to time. How do they know? Like when the Witch of Endor brought up Samuel, how did she know it was Samuel?
That's true.
And he must have been ageless. He must have and if that's the case, you look at the end of all things, the torment of the eternal fire is happening to something that does not. I mean, the part of the torment is you can't stop it because you are going to be subject to it because you are going to be eternal.
Yeah,
like your eternal soul is going to right. So there's something physical to that, but there's also something eternal to that.
Well,
it's funny. There's one more thing. That's like Alex Van Halen just came out with a book called Brothers about he and Eddie.
Oh, okay.
And I saw an interview with him, and they're asking him basically how he deals with it. And he said, matter and energy can't be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
He said, so if you think about it, a person's soul, a person who is living, and that soul cannot be destroyed. It exists. He said, so that's how I know Eddie's here with me, because I know that what was created in Eddie has never gone away. His body may have, but he who he was
is still around.
The energy, because it's energy. There has to be energy there. It's confirmed energy, so it's still there. So what is that? What is that energy?
Yeah.
And how can I get it for my guitar playing?
I know.
That's where I'm heading with all this.
Be careful.
Yeah, I've been on that crossroads. You're looking for me, Willie Brown. Been a long time, hadn't it, Willie? Yes, it
has. my cousin Tim, he's my cousin by marriage. First time we met, he was like, Mad Dog. I was like, Mad Dog, Willie Brown. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, there you go.
Blind Dog, Smokehouse Brown. My favorite part of the movie goes, I comes to tell you the deal's off. He goes, you can take that piece of paper and tear that up. And the devil goes, why on earth would I want to do that?
Yeah, right. I like...
Give me some peace. Why on earth would I want to do that?
I like that the Devil's champion too is Steve Vai. It's like, really?
And still nobody can play like him.
I know, it's crazy. Well, except Joe Satriani, who was his teacher. you know.
But he listens to Joe now. He took over for he went on tour with Sammy to do Eddie stuff. And
oh man, that's crazy.
Nope.
No. I am excited though about the new Karate Kid movie because it's Ralph Macchio and Jackie Chan.
Oh.
And I'm like, that ought to be pretty good. So they're basically combining they're basically saying that all of the Karate Kid movies are all part of the same universe now, and that they're tying in Jackie Chan's stuff with the Ralph Macchio stuff, and kind of giving honor to Pat Morita for Mr. Miyagi. I'm like, that ought to be cool. I want to see that one.
That is an incredible tie-in because Ralph Macchio he's like Dick Clark. He's about 320 years old.
I know.
And he doesn't look like he's
not at
more
all.
than 36.
I know.
He does not age.
Not at all. And Dick Clark was that way. Well, Sophia Loren was like that too. It's like some people, they don't age,
Yeah.
That's the funny thing. Trevor's always like, do I look old? And I'm like, you look like 2 years older than when we met. It's like she doesn't age either. It's just crazy. But I'm like, I don't know why you keep asking me that.
So the Highlander.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I heard they're redoing that one too.
Really?
But, yeah.
I can't do it without Sean Connery though.
I know. You feel that? It's the quickening, McCloud. It's the quickening. I love that.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because, that we're talking about like differences in time, and the anomalies of time. But, I always wonder whether there are those who are walking the earth right now that aren't subject to it, and almost like the way the Highlander,
the counter Saint Germain sort of a thing.
Yeah, and he just there are people that are just
Yeah.
And then, you know, they open a store, and their family has always owned it, but it's really them that's always owned it. They changed their names and that
I
sort of
wonder
thing.
about that too. I mean, that's the Dracula thing. That's the whole one Judah or what's his name?
Judas?
Didn't Judas become the wandering Jew? Or was that a different story about the wandering Jew?
I don't know. I thought we were talking about Judas.
Somebody got cursed, and Jesus made him wander the earth until he returned, and they called him the Wandering Jew. Well, then that somehow tied in with the legend of the Count of Saint Germain, who you know. Do you know about the Count of Saint Germain? So he's this guy that everybody knew him in the French court in the 1700s, and some old lady was like, "How can you be the same guy, because I met you 70 years ago and you haven't aged at all?" And so he's like, "Yes, madam, that was me. I had the pleasure of entertaining your company that time." And they said he could speak all these different languages, and he knew a lot of stuff. But Voltaire kind of poked fun at him. He says, "Oh yeah, he's the one who speaks 1,000 languages and he never ages." Yeah, that guy. You know, he's just kind of like, he's like, yeah, he's full of it, you know. But then later people like Blavatsky claimed, "Oh yeah, I met him on a mountain somewhere in Tibet." But again, it's like, how would you know if you met him? I mean, you could have met me, and I would have said, "Yeah, I'm the Count of Saint Germain." I'll tell you something weird. Maybe I've shared this story. There was a kid I went to school with named Alan, and I don't remember Alan's last name. But
is this a limerick?
No. But I had one year, my locker was out way in the middle of nowhere in the school, and it was right smack dab in the middle of this hallway, which was out in the IT section that nobody was out at. And so I would go get my stuff out of my locker. I'd open my door, and then all of a sudden, Alan would be right there. And he'd be like talking to me about some stupid, weird stuff. And I'm like, okay. And I never knew the guy's name. I didn't know who he was. And so for like a full year, this guy would show up, talk to me. I would look in my locker, and then he would be gone. And I'm like, where the heck did this kid go? And I'm like, I don't know how he would disappear that fast. And so I convinced myself that he was a ghost. And I had this whole thing built up in my mind that maybe he got killed at the school or something, or died in one of the rooms, and he's the ghost of this kid. Well, then he turns up in my IT class, and I had to sit next to him. And I was like, so he's not really a ghost, but how in the heck does he get in and out of the hallway that quick without me being able to spot him? It was like a ninja or something.
Secret door.
Yeah, right. There's a secret door somewhere. And I'm like, that's the kind of weird stuff that I think could make sane, rational people think, well, maybe there's something mysterious or spiritual about it. The ninjas, I mean, they could do things, and people thought that they were demon possessed because of the tremendous skill that they worked hard to be able to pull off some of these feats, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not, I'm not putting everything on the side of the fairies, but I do think that, you know.
I do think that, so I'm not sure we'll be able to do it in this episode, probably the next one, but I think we need to delve into those fairy tales.
We do.
We need to go into those. Because there's a lot.
The ones that are connected to the environment. Let me just give the environment, since that's kind of what we're on today. I have listed Enchanted Forests, which we have Rip Van Winkle, Hansel and Gretel, some of the Celtic stories. We have fairy rings and mushroom circles. Mm-hmm. We have fairy mounds, which is what we talked about with the Lawhead book. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Magical gates or doorways, like the Narnia stories, or the Bifrost in Norse mythology, or the Japanese torii gates. Do you know much about that?
No.
The Japanese torii gates are said to be erected in places that separate the regular world from the spiritual world.
Oh, I've heard of
these. And so when you cross onto a torii gate that leads up to a shrine, it's basically warning you, hey, weird things could happen because you're crossing out of the normal area,
Yeah.
you know?
You're unprotected.
Yeah. Standing stones and circles, and the Outlander, and Stonehenge and Celtic myths, hidden fairy cities like Tir na Nog or Avalon or Brigadoon. Or these are also timeless lands. Or I know, and I don't have them on here, but I know there are some desert cities like this too that are supposed to appear once every 100 years or something, and then vanish back into the desert. And so there's places like that. Go ahead.
It's interesting. We both watch a lot of the the massive edifices with the stones that can't be moved by humans right now. But you wonder if those were essentially were crafted in somewhere else
And
that had entirely different physics, and now they've emerged.
Yeah.
Now they're
Who
brought
knows?
into our time.
I was watching the Haunted Cosmos guys' story, their video. I didn't get far into it on Göbekli Tepe, and their theory is that the Nephilim knew the flood was coming, and then they decided to bury Göbekli Tepe to keep it protected from the flood. And it's like, that makes a lot of sense, actually, because if something's covered up, then the flood's not going to affect it quite the same way that if it was just out there in the open. So I mean, but then that brings up the idea of there's lots of haunted caves, like the Cave of Hypnos in Greece. Also, there's the Cave of the Oracle of Delphi in the Greek tales too. And then there's also these weird underwater caves that a lot of people experience strange things when they're diving. Magical. Go ahead.
There's the stone chambers in near me, where it's called the Stone Chambers of Kent.
But
the stone chambers that are all over the Northeast that precede any Native American, precedes the Vikings, it precedes a lot but they have these magnetic qualities to them that affects the things that are within them.
That's really, really strange. And it's like, and nobody knows where they came from. I didn't wear it today. I was wearing it yesterday. It was a bracelet with Saint Brendan and him and his men crossing the Atlantic. They think that and I put pictures, I think, of it in one of our previous episodes of the Stonehenge of America in Salem, New Hampshire, and they think maybe Brendan and his people might have built those structures, but other than that, they have no idea where they came from. There are magical islands, High Brazil. There's Ultima Thule, things like that. Mountains are also known as portals, like Mount Olympus. Also, I didn't list it here, but if you think about it, Mount Ararat, Mount Hermon, all that could be a
Babel was supposed to be a
man-made mountain,
an ascension to the Eternals.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if the pyramids were made after the Tower of Babel. There's also this whole thing, the ancient aliens people talk about the time before. There are legends of places where they talk about the time before the moon existed, as though the moon was some sort of a construct. And earlier on you talked about what if their days were different? Well, if the moon has an effect on the rotation of the earth and it didn't exist at one point, then maybe the earth moved faster or slower, and that could have accounted for longer lifespans, maybe, and then the whole idea of a firmament that maybe blocked out UV rays could have attributed to that too. Underwater realms is another topic. There's desert vortices. I don't know why I included the Bermuda Triangle under the desert ones. I'll have to fix that. It's a typo.
But that Bermuda Triangle, I was just going to say the same thing. How can things disappear and then reappear?
I know.
If not for some sort of portal idea.
Yeah, or like the one boat, is it the Mary Celeste, where it disappeared and then when it reappeared, there were no people on it at all?
Yeah.
I'll tell you something weird that happened that one of my parishioners told me about when we lived in Illinois. She had been a tugboat captain, basically, in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget what they call them in the Navy, but that was her job. And one night, she was out on the tugboat, and she said it was the strangest thing. A glowing pirate ship, or what she called a pirate ship, floated by. You could see through it, but you could also see and hear everybody that was on board. And they were having like a ball, and all these women were dancing around in the old-fashioned ball gowns. The guys were dressed up like, like Pirates of the Caribbean, and, were dancing around with the women. And they were watching her. Some of the people from the railing were watching her and kind of pointing at her tugboat. And her and the other people that were on the boat watched it, and they just watched it sail off until it vanished in the distance. And she was like, it was one of the strangest things that ever happened to her. And she was like, but as sure as I'm sitting here, it actually happened. And she's like, I have no explanation for it whatsoever, But the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Triangle that's out in the Pacific is another one. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens. And then there's accounts of floating cities. Yeah, like
None of that.
Yeah, sometimes they link Shambhala with a floating city, or sometimes they say, well, no, it's actually in the earth. With what was the one we did? Avarti, or I forget, but we did an episode on it a while back. Dreamlike gardens, like the Paradise Gardens in Persia, haunted and abandoned houses, temples and other sacred spaces, mirage cities. A lot of desert tales about that kind of stuff. Crystal palaces. Subterranean fairy kingdoms, kind of like the green children of Woolpit that came from St. Martin's Land somewhere underneath the ground. Sunken kingdoms, like Lyonesse, which was one of the kingdoms wasn't it the Fisher King's kingdom in King Arthur?
Oh, yeah.
And then it sank. And then Avalon, too, is like a mysterious island that the lady of the lake that she's some kind of being that lives in the lake, and yet the sword doesn't rust, and neither do any of the fixtures, even though it's underwater. And then the last one I have in that section are dimensional rifts in storms or mists. So like Stephen King talks about that in his book, The Mist, where it rolls in and then weird things start to happen when the fog is in.
I remember at King's College, there was we were all just, it was like one night we were all just studying for something, and I forgot what her name was, like Kendra or something like that. And she said, I had the weirdest thing happen to us last week. We were on this bus, and and it was raining, a kind of storm, and we were headed on this, and there was a bridge in front of them that it was a 1-lane bridge.
Oh, wow.
She said you could not. She said we were headed toward it, and another car appeared in front of us, going straight toward that bridge too.
Oh, man.
And she said we all just like braced ourselves.
Knew they were going to get in a wreck.
Yeah. And then they got on the other side of it. They looked back, and there was the car driving away.
That's crazy.
Crossing the bridge, and they had also gone through. So
that happened to us in Ireland. We were on a road and there was a tour bus coming our way, and on one side was a rock wall that and the lanes there are the size of one lane here. So there's a rock wall 6 feet tall on one side. On the other side, there's a little gully, like a little ditch that the water would, and then there's another rock wall. And I'm like, I don't know how am I going to get. So I just pulled over into the little gully and I just closed my eyes and started praying. And the next thing I know, somehow the bus got around us, and everybody in the car was like, "How did that happen?" It's like, and my Irish son-in-law was like, "Yeah, you take your life in your own hands out here." It's just, but everybody, they don't stop for nothing. And and I'm like, I don't know how it got by, and that happened 3 or 4 times while we were driving around out there. It is a scary thing, you know. Yeah. And I don't have an explanation. I just know it happened.
But occupying the same time and space is just a very interesting thing, because that means they were supposed to be there at the same time, and yet something caused their two intersecting times to be alternated.
Yeah,
to be
it's weird.
To be shifted so that they weren't in the same spot. They weren't in the same time, though they were in the same spot.
Yeah.
Like, so it's almost, you know what I mean? So it's not a matter of, it's not what we think. Like, we think it's space. It's more like time.
Yep.
Because they were in.
And then that brings up the other thing, too, is, are some of these visionary things that people see something from another time? Like, even if it's another time, like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You know, or something. I mean, maybe there's optical oddities that can happen that people, like this lady that saw the ghost ship. What if that was really a ship that passed by in the 1700s?
Yeah.
And she was passing by in the 1980s, and they just somehow were able to see each other.
Like ships passing
in the night.
That's
it. And on that, ladies and gentlemen.
let's talk about the fairy tales next time, because I want to get into that.
All right, that sounds good.
Cool.
Anyway, folks, go and check out our WordPress HiddenCitadel4.wordpress.com to see the blog with everything cool. And go to Redbubble, and you're going to have to, when you get to Redbubble, you're going to have to search for the Hidden Citadel, and then you'll find our t-shirts once you type in the Hidden Citadel. So until then, God bless you. We will see you next time on the Hidden Citadel.
Night is coming.
The watchman replies, morning is coming, but night will soon return.